Welcome to the video for Chapter 20 of the Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit, which is going to introduce you to pronouns. Pronouns are words such as he, this, we, who, which, and so on. They're used to stand in for, in Latin pro, a noun, in the sense that I can say the man, but I can also simply say he. I can say the food, but I can also simply say it, and so on. There are different kinds of pronouns. First of all, the personal pronouns for all the three grammatical persons, so first, second, and third. First person would be I, or plural we. Second person would be you. Third person would be he, she, it. And then there are also other third person pronouns, such as the demonstratives, this, that, or they. Relative pronouns, who, which, or that, in the sense of the man who is standing over there, the food that I ate earlier, and so on. And finally, interrogative or question pronouns, who, what, and so on. Pronouns in Sanskrit have endings that are different from noun endings, and therefore we need to look at pronouns and how they are declined separately. Furthermore, the stem of a Sanskrit pronoun, that is the form that would be used in a compound, and the form that we would normally cite the pronoun by, i.e. the form that you would normally find listed in a dictionary, in a vocabulary list, and so on. This stem form is quite different very often from the nominative singular form of the pronoun, and therefore the pronouns introduced in this book will be referred to or will be quoted by both the nominative singular, specifically the nominative singular masculine, and the stem form. So, for example, the first pronoun that we're going to look at is sach tad, where sach is the nominative singular masculine form and tad is the stem form. This chapter is going to introduce two pronouns, two third-person pronouns, namely sach tad and iyām idam. So let's begin with sach tad. This is a pronoun that means either he, she, it, or this. And we will come back to in what circumstances it has which meaning in just a minute. But first of all, let's look at the forms. What we have here are the masculine and neuter forms, and just as in many other stems, the neuter is different from the masculine only in nominative, vocative, and accusative. And here we actually don't even have a vocative. And the reason for that is that in a third person pronoun, we only have forms that talk about someone or something, he, she, or it. But a vocative would be talking to someone, and that's what we would have in the second person pronoun, which is you. So no third person pronoun has a vocative. Thus, neuter forms only different from the masculine in the nominative and accusative. And let's start by looking at the masculine forms. As was said just a minute ago, we have in pronouns a number of endings that are new, that are different from any noun endings that we've seen so far. This is mostly the case in the singular, where the forms are sach, tam, tena, tasmai, tasmat, tasya, tasmin. In the nominative singular, we have a form that is nicely recognizable. It ends in ach, just like narach. Then in the accusative singular, we have an ending am, that is just like naram, but we have a different stem. So we have a stem that begins with s in the nominative and a stem that begins with t in the accusative and all other cases. So that's something we need to remember. Then in the instrumental, we have an ending that's again just like narach. But then in the dative, we have a slightly different stem, namely not just t, but tasm. And then we have an ending I that is different from what we've encountered in most forms so far. Then in the ablative, we have an ending at that we know from, for example, short a stems. But again, we have this slightly extended stem, so tasm. Then in the genitive, we have an ending that we know, for example, from narasya. But then in the locative, we have an ending that is completely unknown, at least on the basis of what we've learned so far, what we've seen so far in noun stems. So do use the similarities between some of these forms and noun forms we've already encountered to help you memorize the paradigm as a whole, but still, given that there are many different, many little bits that are different from what we've seen so far, it's probably best to approach the singular through straightforward rote memorization. So, sach, tam, tena, tasmai, tasmat, tasya, tasmin. And once you can do that, do the same thing from the bottom to the top. Tasmin, tasya, tasmat, tasmai, tena, tam, sach. Then next, the dual. That is completely straightforward because it's absolutely parallel in its endings to what we know, for example, from narach. So we have narau, nara, bhyam, narayoch, and here we have tau, ta, bhyam, tayoch. In the plural, on the other hand, we have mostly forms that are familiar, that are just like the forms of nara, but there are two forms that are different. First of all, the forms that we do know, accusative tan, just like naran, instrumental taich, just like naraich, then dative ablative tebiach, just like narebiach, and locative teshu, just like nareshu. The two forms that are new are the nominative masculine plural, which is te. This is a form that, if you are like most Sanskritists, is going to confuse you, at least at first, because it looks a little bit like a locative singular, like nare or wane, or alternatively it looks like the nominative, vocative, accusative dual of either a long a stem or of a neuter short a stem, so like mitre or sene. But no, te is the nominative masculine plural. The second form that is going to be unexpected is the genitive plural, which we might expect on the basis of narach to be naranam and therefore tanam, but no, it is tesham. So the forms that you need to pay special attention to in the plural are te, nominative, and tesham, genitive. Then the neuter forms. In the nominative and accusative singular, we have tat. That is an ending that we haven't encountered so far, but it's basically parallel to what we have in English neuter pronouns. Tat has the same ending as that, in effect. Then in the dual, we have an ending that we already know from neuter short a stems. So there we have te, parallel to, for example, wane, mitre, and so on. And in the plural, nominative, and accusative, we have tani, which is parallel to short a stem neuters as we've encountered them so far. Finally, a short note on these forms, and that is that the nominative masculine singular, sach, actually appears as sa whenever it is followed by a word that begins with a consonant. So this man would not actually be sach narach, but it would be sa narach. Next up are the feminine forms of sach and tad. And here again we're going to begin by looking at the dual and plural because again those endings should be mostly familiar. Here because of their overlap with the endings of long a stems. So in the dual we have te, ta, bhyam, and tayoch, which is basically parallel to sene, sena, bhyam, and senayoch. Then in the plural we have tach for the nominative and accusative, tabich for the instrumental, tabiach for the dative and ablative. And then in the genitive, again, we have a slightly different form from what we might expect, namely we have ta sam rather than ta nam, which we might expect on the basis of sena nam, but no, here we have ta sam, so make sure to remember that. And then in the locative we have ta su, with the ending that we already know from sena su. In the singular, on the other hand, there are a couple of unexpected or new endings. In the nominative singular, we have sa, so once again we have a form that does not begin with a T but begins with an S, sa. The rest of the forms do begin with a T though, and so we get tam, taya, tasyai, tasyach, tasyach, tasyam. Again, there is some overlap with forms that we already know, but probably not enough. So again, it is probably best to memorize these forms by reciting them. So sa, tam, taya, tasyai, tasyach, tasyach, tasyam. And then again from bottom to top, tasyam, tasyach, tasyach, tasyai, taya, tam, sa. Two forms that are very easy to confuse are the dative singular tasyai and its masculine and neuter counterpart tasmai, One way of keeping them apart, or one way of remembering which one is which, is to remember that the form with the M, namely tasmai, is masculine. Finally, the meanings of sahtad. As was mentioned earlier, this needs to be translated either as he, she, it, or as this. And it's in its use together with other nouns that it needs to be translated as this, or actually also as that. In English, there's quite a difference between this or that. Sanskrit pronouns have quite a bit of overlap here, and you need to decide from the context whether a translation as this or that is better. But at any rate, this translation as this or that is only when these forms are used together with a noun. So, for example, sa nari would mean this woman, or, depending on context, that woman. However, when sahtad is used on its own, then its forms need to be translated as he, she, or it. But you need to remember that genders are grammatical categories, and so we need to see what a pronoun is referring to before we can translate it. For example, tam pashyami, or without sandhi, tam pashyami, meaning I see him. Him only if this grammatically masculine form actually refers to someone who is biologically male. But I see it if it refers to something that's grammatically masculine but not biologically male, such as vrikshah, tree. Similarly with the feminine, tam pashyami could mean I see her, if it indeed is used to refer to a woman, but if it is used to refer to a noun that is simply grammatically feminine, such as sena, army, then in English again we need to translate it not as she, because we wouldn't say she when talking about the army, but we would say it when talking about the army, and therefore we would have to translate tam pashyami as I see it. Finally, when sahtad is used together with personal names, it often does not need to be translated. Sa Ramach is literally the Rama, i.e. the same Rama that we already saw earlier in this story. But in English, we don't use pronouns in this way, and so into idiomatic English, we would have to translate Sa Ramach simply as Rama. The second pronoun to look at is iyām idam, which means this or that. And again, the ideas between this, i.e. this one here, and that one further away, are fairly separate in English, but in Sanskrit we have several pronouns whose range of meaning encompasses both of these. Now, it looks like we've got a rather large number of new forms to learn here, but the reason why iyām idam is introduced in the same chapter as sahtad is that actually many of its forms are very similar to those of sahtad. Namely, if we look at the forms from the instrumental on, so instrumental, dative, ablative, genitive, locative, we will see that they basically are exactly like those of sahtad, except that they're missing the initial t. So, for example, in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the locative singular asmin, which is just like tasmin without the initial t. Above that, asya instead of tasya, asmat instead of tasmat, asmai instead of tasmai, and so on. There are just a few exceptions to this pattern, and one is that a couple of forms don't have just the same form as sahtad minus the t, but they have an extra syllable. They have un added to the beginning of their forms. So that would be the instrumental singular in all three genders. In the masculine and neuter we have annena instead of ena, and in the feminine we have annaya instead of aya. Then in the dual genitive locative, again in all three genders, we have annayoch, where we might expect ayoch. And finally, the last irregularity in this pattern is that the instrumental plural in masculine and neuter is ewig, where on the parallel with sahtad we might expect eich. Sahtad has teich, we might expect this to be eich, but no, it is ewig. But fortunately that shouldn't be a great problem, because all instrumental plurals, with the exception of those of short a stems, have the ending bich, and so the ending bich is fairly easily recognizable. That leaves us with nominative and accusative, and there what we have is, in the singular, almost all forms ending in am. So we have iyām, imām in the masculine, idām in the neuter, and iyām in the feminine. So there's one form that doesn't end in but in ām, the accusative singular feminine. And these forms don't really look like nominatives, don't really look feminine, and so on. And so those basically need to be straightforwardly memorized. Iyām, imām, idām, iyām, iyām. The remainder, the dual and plural forms in nominative and accusative, are basically the stem im plus the endings that we already know. So imau, ime in the dual in masculine and neuter, ime in the dual in the feminine. And then in the plural we have for the masculine ime and iman, just like te and tan. In the neuter we have imani, just like tani. And in the plural of the feminine we have imach, which again is parallel to the feminine form of sartat, which is tach. That was it for this chapter. We hope that you found this video helpful, and if you have any comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you. Please do write to us at ruppel@cambridge-sanskrit.org. And now, for your own work on this material, good luck and have fun!